Hello, good morning. I think your mic is unmuted. It's muted, you have to unmute.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, good morning.
Yeah. Good morning. How are you, sir?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Sorry, there was some network issue and it took me time to
All
join.
right, it's all right.
Yeah. So shall we begin in like 1 or 2 minutes?
Yeah, yeah. Take your time and we'll continue it for 1 hour. How is the usual practice?
Yeah. You can talk for around 1 hour and then we'll have the question and answer around for say half an hour and
Wonderful.
then we wrap it up.
Yeah, wonderful.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Indian Research Scholars 24th webinar. We are back once again with a topic that is very relevant, the politics of citizenship and refugees in South Asia. And it is clear that it seems to be quite popular. We are glad that you have joined us for an in-depth analysis and insights by Dr. Sajauddin Chaparban. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Before we begin, let me introduce myself. I am Ariba Hassan, Senior Research Fellow at the Department of Political Science, University of Hyderabad. Before we begin, let me add that the association will have its 25th webinar next week, and it would not have been possible without the help, encouragement, and support from all of you. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you and also share the news that we will be hosting Joseph Nye and Noam Chomsky soon. We hope you all join us there. Also, we have released our first newsletter that is available on all our social media platforms. We are available on WhatsApp, Twitter, Telegram, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. If you want to join us on any platform, do subscribe or follow us by clicking on the links in our feedback form, which will be read after the vote of thanks. Also, in case you want to quote any speaker or want to watch these webinars for your reference, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you. Now let me introduce the speaker for today. Dr. Sajauddin Nijamuddin Chaparban is an assistant professor in the Center for Diaspora Studies at Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar. He received his Doctor of Philosophy in Comparative Literature 2020, this year, last year from University of Hyderabad, India. His areas of interest include contemporary literary and cultural theory, English literature, migration, diaspora, refugee and forced migration studies, human rights, contemporary English literature, Muslim literature, South Asian studies, social linguistics, and subaltern studies. As you can see, he's a man of many talents and has a lot of interest. And I have seen that he is also very, what should I say, a good researcher who publishes a lot. He also presented several research papers at national and international conferences, delivered lectures, and attended workshops in various countries, including India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Austria, Germany, Poland, Taiwan, Sweden, Italy, and Uzbekistan. He has received the Maulana Azad National Fellowship Award from 2011 to 2016 from University Grants Commission for his research degrees and also the Wenner-Gren Foundation and ESA Fellowship 2018 from Stockholm University, Sweden. There are 15 publications to his credit. He has also edited a special issue on Rohingya refugees, identity, citizenship, and human rights of Cafe Dissensus, New York City, USA, and his recent paper is Religious Identity and Politics of Citizenship in South Asia, a reflection on refugees and migrants in India, published in Identities and Citizenship of Development, the quarterly journal of the Society for International Development at Palgrave, Rome, Italy. He can be reached at Shaujuddin09 at gmail. Wasting time, and as you can see, the fortunately helped in his now invite this to over to sir.
Hello, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Riba, for your kind words. Am I audible? Participant?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're audible.
All right, all right. Thank you so much. Today, as we have planned uh, to discuss uh, the contemporary issue, which is politics of citizenship in South Asia, and how refugees are being created, or how refugees are being met, and what are their challenges, what are their problems, and how they are treated in homeland as well as in host land. So to study this, we have framed our topic as politics of citizenship and refugees in South Asia. So this particular topic is a result of my engagement with the refugee studies in the last 3 years, and I have also worked on exclusively on Rohingya refugees and other refugees in South Asia. Uh, so the very idea of citizenship today has created a lot of questions in the our day-to-day discourses, particularly in the context of social sciences and humanities, also in the political discourses. South Asia, as one of the vibrant global South region, has a growing effect of religious or cultural nationalism, and this has affected the uh, devastatingly affected the minority populations in these countries, whether it's Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, small and peaceful countries like Bhutan, Myanmar, country underdeveloped countries like Myanmar, Sri Lanka. All these countries either created creating the refugees and hostile to refugees. This is very uh, disturbing and a serious issue, which is not being addressed at any level. And in fact, political parties in these countries are taking advantage of these most vulnerable communities, and trying to manipulate the entire issue for their political gains. As we know that citizenship is a status which is granted or given or inherited to a person who borns in a particular country. Citizenship is a national and a political status. It gives certain rights and responsibilities. But then what is citizenship? Citizen and citizenship. Citizen is a person or a national. In many cases, citizen, these things are interchanged with the national and nationality. Citizen, national, citizenship, nationality. But Today, this very idea of citizenship is being politicized, and it is being, function as a tool to uh, subjugate or discriminate the other, the constructed other. Yeah, and many countries in South Asia have handsome, a majoritarian population of a particular community in different countries. For example, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, we have a Muslim majoritarian population, which create question for the minorities in these countries, be it Hindu minorities, Sikh minorities, Buddhist minorities, you know, so and so. And coming back to, Bhutan, uh, and Myanmar, Sri Lanka, these countries are the countries where the Buddhists are in majoritarian population, and these countries also have the minorities like Muslims and Hindus and mm, Christians and so on, so things. And countries like India, Nepal, and these countries are having the good number of Hindus along with the minorities like Muslims and Buddhists and Christians, Jains, and so on, so things. So South Asia, in these South Asian countries, the kind of recent development being, taken place in the political domain, and the political parties which celebrate cultural nationalism are in power, and those parties are now taken up the power positions and uh, trying to project the minorities as the other, the outsider, the and it also they are also trying to treat them as the uh, subnationals or sub-citizens or second-class citizens, and going to an extent that considering these others, the minorities, as not at all citizens, not at all even human beings. Their human rights are violated, their civil rights are violated. In fact, they are stripping down the rights of these minorities. We will discuss at length how uh, these the rise of cultural or religious nationalism in South Asia is affecting the minorities, which contributing to another segment of minorities in general, and minorities in particular in the context of migration and refugees. The minorities are being made minorities in terms of refugees and uh, uh, migrants. Particularly, let us take an example of Pakistan. Hindus and Sikhs, Pakistan and Afghanistan, Hindus, Sikhs, and Buddhists were forced to leave these countries, those who were already minorities, and they forced to take refuge in other countries like India and Nepal. And these minorities are becoming the refugee minorities and immigrant minorities in India and Nepal. Similarly, the refugees from Myanmar, refugees like Muslims or chain minorities of Christians, they are forced to leave the Myanmar and take refuge in the neighboring countries. And importantly, they are being projected as all these minorities, including India, the recent case of uh, NRC and CAA. We will come to that debate as well, how this the modification or the amendment of citizenship law is affecting the minorities in India. So the kind of development which are taking place, we will go chronologically and country-wise in our analysis, and we will try to see how these new development of cultural nationalism affecting the minorities and creating the other minorities. And these minorities are treated as non-citizens. They are projected as non-citizens. They are projected as anti-nationals. They are projected as the outsider, the stranger. Their loyalty is being questioned. They're they are always expected to wear the nationalism on their forehead. And the expectationalism of majoritarian has always been lingering in the subconscious of the minorities. And they are also uh, and the most dangerous part of projecting these minorities by the majoritarian discourses or the political parties, uh, they try to project them as the other, they suspect them, they try to show them as an outsider. But more importantly, and this was all part of political debate, a political game till the recent past. But starting from 1940s and 50s and somewhere in 1980s and recently in India in the 20th century, so these modern, the postmodern developments that are taking place, the political development that are taking place in the subcontinent is legally trying to persecute the minorities. The laws which were being created in uh, Bhutan, the laws which were created in Myanmar, the laws which were citizenship law I'm talking about, the laws which were created in the Sri Lanka, the laws which are now being created in India. So these laws so are trying to persecute, discriminate the minorities systematically and legally. Then this is not the whole debate that was going on in India. It's not new to subcontinent. Subcontinent, South Asia is quite familiar with this religious antagonism and the politics of projecting the cultural other as the obvious other. So this is not new, but we will come to that debate. But before we go to that, let us know how the uh, citizenship is being inherited and granted. There is also a debate on citizenship and nationality. How nationality and citizenship are different, or are they different? And can these concepts can these concepts be can be interchangeable and so on so things. But most of the time, citizenship is inherited, birth upon a place of land, which is called Jews soil, and ethnic belonging to a group of people, which has been called as Jews sanguine. These are two basic tenets of the principles, you can call it, of citizenship. Citizenship is being granted on the basis of one who borns in your own soil, that is Jew soil principle. And another one is granted. Citizenship is also being granted to people who seek the citizenship, and this granting citizenship has a huge space to manipulate, to interpret, to misinterpret the respective community. That's why certain countries in this uh, subcontinent take the advantage of this space and uh, try to manipulate or articulate their stance of citizenship. And another important part of the citizenship, the development, is the kind of citizenship which is being now granted on the basis of religion. I try to call it as "jus religio." These are Italian terms which are being used in the context of citizenship. And with the recent development of the most uh, uh, debated CAA, so citizenship is also being granted nowadays on the basis of religion. And the very idea of citizenship is also become a political tool to target opponents or the constructed others. It has also become a bread in the hands of political party to whom it should be given and to whom it should not be given. And the rise of nationalism, and these nationalisms are veiled and celebrated at the cost of violation of human rights of the minorities. Citizen and citizenship mean only the majoritarian imagination. It's only applicable to only majority community. The very idea of citizen and citizenship means only majoritarian people and that community. Therefore, the whole debate about citizenship started in the South Asia, be it in the context of Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, or be it in the context of India, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, etc. And the minorities in the context of citizenship, they are becoming double marginalized, double minorities. One being in minority in one's country, and then becoming refugees and becoming minorities. Uh, and and this citizenship is also constructed not just a concept, but also uh, a strategy against the outsider, the other. And who is that other? The other is the minorities. So this is how the whole debate about the perceptions about the citizenship is being uh, constructed in South Asia. But if you look at the recent refugees in South Asia, whether that are being created from Myanmar, uh, starting from Afghanistan, we have Hindu, Sikh, and Buddhist refugees from Afghanistan, including some Muslim minority refugees, and Pakistan also created some refugees, be it Hindus or Buddhist. And coming to India, India is also under this. Those people who trapped in the process of NRC, they would be my refugees for tomorrow. And the kind of politics that is being working, the whole legal engineering is being taking place to structurally curtailing the rights of the uh, uh, undocumented people. So we will come to that debate. And from Bangladesh, the Hindu Chakmas and the Buddhist, Chakma Buddhist and Hindu Hazoms, and also the from Sri Lanka, you have Muslim refugees and Hindu refugees are being Hindus, Indians were being expelled. Then you have from Myanmar, you have Hindus, Christians, and Muslim refugees. The recent case of Rohingyas, and from Bhutan, you have refugees of Lhotshampa, refugees of Nepal. Uh, there is also, religious persecution of Hindus in Bhutan, and that is also a result of, legal engineering of citizenship laws in these countries. So if you look at these different, I just pointed out certain major refugee communities, and if you look at the percentage of refugees globally, it is around, according to UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, by 2019, there are 79.5 million people around the world who are forcibly displaced from their home. And among them, 26 million are refugees, and half of them are below the age of 18. So the young children are being displaced from their home. And Turkey is the topmost country at the global level to host refugees, that is around 3.5 million, followed by Pakistan, Uganda, and Iran. Then, in terms of creation of refugees, you have Syria, which is one of the topmost countries to produce refugees, that is around 6.3 million, followed by Afghanistan, 2.6 million, and Sudan, 2.4 million. These are the most affected countries which have produced 57% of the global refugee population. And recently, the Myanmar is one of the topmost countries to produce refugees or create the refugees uh, after these countries, and that is also not being properly uh, noted under the UNHCR statistics yet. Then coming back to the data in South Asia, the refugee data in South Asia, according to UNHCR and World Bank data, South Asia, almost all countries in South Asia except Afghanistan, which has signed the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugee and the 1967 Protocol. It was the only country, Afghanistan was the only country which signed the Refugee Convention. Other countries in South Asia have not signed the Refugee Convention. But despite this, South Asian countries produce and also give shelter to the refugees in South Asia. So, and I have a data from World Bank 1990s and 2017, uh, because I just wanted to see how refugee population is decreasing and increasing in these countries in last few decades. Uh, in Afghanistan, it was 50 refugees in 1990, which rise in 2017 to uh, 75,000. In India, we had 212,000 approximately refugees in 1990, which reduced to 197,000 in 2017. In Pakistan, we had 19 in 1990, 30 around 33 lakh refugees, which reduced in 2017 to uh, 14 lakhs. In Bangladesh, we had 145 refugees in 1990, which increased drastically in 2017 to uh, around 1 million because of the expulsion of uh, Rohingyas from Myanmar. And in Sri Lanka, we had no refugees in 1990s, but in 2017, we had 820 refugees. Maldives, I did not find any data on Maldives and Bhutan, but Nepal had 17,000 refugees in 1990s, which increased to 21,000 in 2017. But in 2016, Nepal had 1 lakh 20 or 40,000 refugees, which were mostly the Lhotshampas. But then gradually what happened, these Lhotshampas were being settled and moved with the help of UNHCR to different parts of the world. And there are only around 17,000 Lhotshampas Hindus in Nepal now. Some of them are in India too. So this is a brief data on the refugees in South Asia. So South Asia hosts around 3 million refugees of the global percentage. That means, according to World Bank, South Asia has reduced uh, the number of refugees compared to 1990s to 2017. 7.2% refugees were reduced. In 1990s, there were 2 lakhs, around 2 lakhs refugees in India, which were in 17 reduced to 1 lakh 97,122 in 2017. And in 1990s, Islamic Republic of Iran was at the first position in accommodating refugees, that is 41 lakhs, followed by Pakistan 32 lakhs, whereas India was placed at 23rd uh, world ranking in the hosting refugees, and in South Asia, it was second after Pakistan. In 2017, Pakistan remained the first country to accommodate refugees, followed by Bangladesh as the second country to accommodate most refugees in South Asia. India is now placed at the third position in accommodating refugees. Now coming back to South Asia, now to India. In India, we have around 207,334 refugees in India, according to 2019 data of UNHCR fact sheet, out of which 1,95,000 are refugees according to World Bank, and others are asylum seekers. That means approximately 1.5% of global refugee population resides in India and 0.7% of the total Indian population. The government and these my refugees in South India are hosted or facilitated through two mandates. One is government mandate, another one is UNHCR mandate. The government mandate refugees are the refugees mostly from Tibet and Sri Lanka, which comprises the 80% of the total refugee population in India. Whereas the remaining population, refugee population in India, is hosted and facilitated by the UNHCR mandate, which includes the refugees from Myanmar, Afghanistan, Iran, Somalia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Iraq, etc. And now this was the brief data, but then again, coming back to the making of refugees in South Asia, how refugees are being made in South Asia. This is the interesting debate that I wanted to discuss with you. Uh, in the post-colonial South Asia, as we discussed earlier, refugees are always treated as a second-class citizens, suspected, and their loyalties are being questioned. They are framed as anti-nationals and separatists and so on so things. They are also projected as outsider, foreigner, infiltrators, illegal migrants, and now recently the terrorists, the intruders, and so on so things. Making the other refugees through these projections, through these uh, manipulations or stereotypes. So these minorities were projected as the other, and the making of the other or the constructing of the other through continuous discourses, through popular discourses, through media, through politicians, they are being projected as others, and this has resulted in the legal social exclusion, social legal discriminations, violation, violent attacks, including the bombings, killing, rape, arsoning, whatnot, plundering, properties, killing children, raping in the mass form, even by army. These things have led, and these are not new to the South Asia. This is case with almost all countries in South Asia, and this is how the minorities were being targeted through projecting them as the other. Uh, Look at the citizenship law in Bhutan. In Bhutan, you had Bhutan has come up with the Citizenship Act in 1985, which was passed in the parliament to allow legal persecution and annihilation of citizenship of the Hindus, the Nepali Hindus, the Lot Shampas. The Lot Shampas are also called the Southerners in Bhutan. This law has curtailed their citizenship. This law withdraws their citizenship. But before this law comes, they were the citizens of Bhutan. Remember this part. Before the law comes in Myanmar, Rohingyas were the citizens of Myanmar. Before that citizenship law come in Sri Lanka, Hindus were citizens in Tamil Hindus were the citizens, and the Pakistani Muslims were the citizens of Sri Lanka. And the recent NRC and CAA, most of those who are caught in this list of NRC were part of citizenship of India. Those documentation process and other things, that complexities, we will go into that details later. But what I mean to say is that look at how these laws are, cutting the citizenships of the minorities. Coming back to the case of Bhutan, the policies of framing one as other, unpatriot, anti-national, foreigner, outsider, or illegal is neither new to the region, that is South Asia, nor to the Muslim minorities in this region. An earlier example of the systematic persecution can be traced back to Bhutan Citizenship Act of 1985, and its origin in Bhutan can be traced back to 1600 century, but due to the discriminatory policies and laws, they were labeled as a newcomers and outsider under the slogan of one culture, one people. And these nationalisms in South Asia, one people, one culture, one people, uh, one the homogenizing practices. These nationalisms have the banner of homogenizing the population. Eli writes, I quote, in the 1980s, illegal immigrants re-emerged as a political issue, and the King Jigme Singh Wangchuk's desire to maintain Bhutanese cultural identity based around one culture, one people led to the 1985 Citizenship Act. The policy promoted the ruling class, language, and religion, Lamaitic Buddhism, favoring the Nagalong Drupka ethnic group. The law put the ban on Nepalese language, required a traditional form of dress, restricted the practices of Hinduism, and even placed hardo limitations on the population. The Shampas who were unable to or unwilling to adhere to the constraints or were incapable of proving citizenship were reclassified as illegal immigrants. And in these countries, almost all South Asian countries, the very idea of illegal immigrants is selectively connected to selected uh, groups. It's not that all immigrants coming to one country are called as immigrants. Some are being considered as bhai bahan, some are considered as outside service, some are considered as illegal, some are considered as illegal. Not on the basis of documentation, but just on the basis of culture, basis of religion, basis of ethnicity. These are the common problems that South Asia today has. Now, take the example of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka too, Hindus of Tamil ethnicity were persecuted and labeled as outsiders and foreigners through the adaptation of the discriminatory law. The Ceylon National Congress, after getting independence in 1940, renamed itself as a United National Party and focused on the promotion of Sinhala Buddhist interests, which included legal discrimination against Pakistani Muslims and Indian Hindus. Among the first policies enacted were the Ceylon Citizenship Act of 1948 and the Indian Pakistani Resident Act in 1948 and the Parliamentary Election Amendment Act of 1949, which disenfranchised every person not holding Ceylonese citizenship, unquote phrase. These laws led to disown century-old citizens of these regions who settled in today's Sri Lanka from today's Pakistan and India, who were mostly Hindus from Tamil Nadu and Muslims from both India and Pakistan. The accused minorities had settled in Sri Lanka mostly during the 19th and 20th century under the Kangani migration system, which was a part of endangered labor migration to the south. The rise of nationalistic parties like SLFD, Sri Lanka Freedom Party, founded by former UNP member SWRD Bandaranaike, who gave slogan of Sinhalas only. Like Bhutan, you have a slogans also. Sinhalas only, Bhumi Putras only. If you go to this uh, south, southeast and east Asian countries, you have Bhumiputras movement, which again was based on citizenship. So these movements were, formulated to target the other, the constructed outsiders. This led to the political and social turmoil in Sri Lanka and to the expulsion of around 2 lakh Tamils who took refuge in India. According to UNHCR, 73,000 Sri Lankan refugees are living in India in 12 camps in southern part of Tamil Nadu. And in the context of Myanmar also, the national imagination wanted to see the country as a Buddhist state and was the case in Sri Lanka and Bhutan. In one of my editorial, I write that Rohingyas are neither the most persecuted minorities nor the stateless. Rather, they are a victim of systematic engineering of uh, citizenship law, and uh, they are created as the stateless today. So these are some examples from the making of uh, different laws which made these minorities as the outsider. Another important part of cities, how these refugees and migrants are seen in the subcontinent, as these refugees and migrants are always seen as they are guests in different countries, but at the same time they are treated as a ghost, not as a guest. So the idea of guest has turned into a ghost, and this host land has become an hostile land for refugees and migrants in South Asia, almost all countries in South Asia. So this uh, disturbing relation between the guest and host continues in South Asia. In the wake of religious nationalism, framing the unwanted citizens, the religious minorities as outsider or illegals, has become quite common in the subcontinent by excavating the historical roots of border crossing, though in reality there were no borders. In the wake of this religious nationalism, we what the dominant classes, these right-wing political parties tries to trace the roots of these minorities, and some of them are found as migrants. But who are these migrants? They are the result of colonial enterprise. They are the product of colonial mobility in South Asia. This is one of the important points that I wanted to discuss. Many millions of, uh, let us say, Indians in a sense, India, including Pakistan and Bangladesh of today, and some part of Myanmar and some part of Sri Lanka, because the border was not that clear. So it was all part of British India. So during this time, during the British India, the colonial migration has taken millions of people from mainland India of today to territorial India, in fact, the other countries of South Asia, including Myanmar and Sri Lanka. Many people were, taken as indentured coolies or laborers. They were also taken as a sepoys or babus or clerks and free and passive migrants to these countries. And uh, some people, like, for example, the Nepalis were invited to construct temples in Bhutan. So Nepali neighbors, those were the Lhotshampas in the context of, I'm speaking in the context of Lhotshampas. People from South and Central India used to migrate and were also taken to different parts of countries within South Asia to trade, spread religion and work and so on so things. Most importantly and visibly during the indentureship of British Empire between 1884 to 1914, millions of people shuffled within the British Raj, which stretched from India's today's Pakistan to Myanmar and Afghanistan to Kanyakumari. Between 1840 and 1942, only approximately 5 million people from India were recruited within British colonies in Ceylon, Burma, and Malaya. It is estimated, Vijay Dev Das pointed out, that over 1.7 million Indians were recruited to work in Malaya, including Singapore, 1.6 million to Burma, and approximately 1 million to Ceylon. And after getting the independence of these South Asian countries, where do these migrants exist? Who thought about them? They have become the minorities in those countries. Those who return back, maybe there was no problem much, but those who are returning today, India is saying that they are not part of India. Bangladesh is saying they are not part of Bangladesh. Myanmar is saying they are not part of Myanmar. So where do these people go? Aren't they alien that they drop from the another planet on this part? Neither British colonial empires, nor the post-colonial empire, nor the post-colonial states in these regions gave thought about these people. They are subject to lose their uh, citizenship. And today we talk about the documentation. Today in 21st century, in the late 20th century, we are talking about the documentation. How much, how strong our documentation was during the colonial time and even in the post-colonial time of 70 years. Documentation was never a serious debate in the civil discussions, nor a public discussion, nor a family discussion. It was neither in a political discussion. With the recent manipulation of citizenship and the nationality and the very idea of nationalism, the partisan nationalism has created the questions for those who have given less attention to the documentation. Anyone wants to say anything? Okay. And as I said, the borders were not that strong in the. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Yes, yes, sir.
So during the colonial time, there was a huge mobility. People were, massively migrating and forced to migrate. This is one of the real questions no one has given thought about. These are the real issues of research today. And there was also a huge migration due to partition. Partition has also, forced millions of people across the borders in South Asia. Hindus in a rapid manner migrated to India, and from India to Pakistan, and from East Pakistan to West Pakistan, and West Pakistan to East Pakistan to India, from India to Bangladesh, Bangladesh to India. Still today, the whole debate about the migrants and legal and illegal, quote and unquote, migrants. So these are all the issues that needs proper attention in our intellectual and scholarly discussion as well as political debates. And and this all happened because the borders were and borders are still porous in South Asia. The borders that we heard about today are not as strong as it's supposed to be. People might migrate, and even there are some borders you don't require visa to go to Nepal. You can walk down as another states, one of another state. You just show your card and go. India-Bangladesh border. There is still border crossing between India and Pakistan, despite the high tightened security. There is huge exchange of goods and people on the border, across borders. So borders in South Asia were porous, were not as strong as today, and even if today there is still the legal and illegal migration, quote and unquote. So the new conditions of minorities pose a challenge to intellectual and policy makers. The sanctity of the yardsticks and definitions of migrants, legal and illegal, in today's world has led right wing politicians to manipulate the whole issue to attain their political goals and appeasements of majority population in their respective countries, be it Myanmar, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and so on. So Sri Lanka, including, and Bhutan for that matter. So this was there. But then I said minorities of these countries, be it the local minorities or the immigrant minorities. These minorities are autochthones, the locals, and the migrants who are absorbed into these respective societies remain integral part of cultural collective for long time. The growing majoritarian dominance is increasingly hostile towards them. But then I argue that they should be treated as the citizens of those respective countries because they are not migrant of today. They are migrants of colonial enterprise. And I also argue that since borders were not clear during the colonial time and most of the migrants are migrated before the creation of new borders or nations, these minorities should not be treated as outsiders and international law should be respected. The responsibility of the former colonial empires to intervene into the matter pertaining to the migrant minorities in the subcontinent is also important, as the UK did it, United Kingdom, when there was an issue about the Indians in South Asia, during the time of Idi Amin, many Indians were expelled. So was it their problem? Because many migrants were taken there as indentured labor. Indians, what was their problem? What was their mistake? It was British Empire who took them to the South African countries. But thankfully, India thought about whether to let these people back to India or not. But it was Britain who allowed them to apply for citizenship. The legal system of Britain permitted them to apply for citizenship, and some of them moved to England and some of them to Canada, which also led. See, government agrees, but people of white people, they did not agree. Then there was riots in London, 1960s, right? So despite that, but UK intervened into this matter. Similarly, this matter of the immigrant or refugee minorities in a subcontinent should also be intervened, and the issue should be, settled. Then I will give some examples of the exclusion of systematic exclusion of minorities and the making of refugees. As I said, in the context of India, these two recent laws, two recent developments, that CAA and NRC, are also going to create a huge refugee population in the subcontinent. Excuse me. One is because, as I said, there was a huge mobility during the colonial time, and those are unanswered. And another one is there was no document consciousness. And if you ask someone to produce a document from 1940s and 60s, how many of us do the voting today? How many of our parents do the votings and maintain documents today? Very few. Those who are, that's what I said, the document consciousness is also very important in today's the world of refugee politics and all that. Citizenship politics, excuse me. So these were the things. And another thing that I wanted to, Sri Lanka we discuss, and the case of then we had the Buddhization of these countries. We had Hinduization of India. And we have Islamization of Pakistan and Afghanistan. In Afghanistan and Pakistan and some part of Bangladesh, there was also the rise of religious leadership, which which excluded this, but not legally, but socially, culturally, to the other minorities like Buddhist and Sikhs and Hindus. Therefore, we have migrants, refugee population from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and this Bangladesh. Then you have another case of which doesn't fit into South Asia, but I would like to mention the case of China. The Chinese Chinization, or technically Sinocism, which is also working. This nationalism is also working as a homogenizing agent of the population, which is under the Chinese rule and which has also become the part of Chinese rule. That is the Tibet, and that is Xinjiang province of China. So there also the Muslim as the other, the Buddhist as the other, are treated as the other, and are victim of religious, linguistics, and cultural persecution. And but more importantly, after discussing these different countries, what I found is that the underlying common rhetoric in these countries is the discriminatory law, the labels, the framing of minorities as the other, which is leading to persecution of the others, the constructed others, the minorities, and also leading to create the refugee others, the migrant others. This is the common thread that I found, and this kind of practice, labeling the minority as the other, the anti-national, or the outsider, that is very common in India today, which is not new for South Asian countries. Take an example of Bhutan, what happened in 1980s, 90s. Take example of Sri Lanka, what happened. Take example of Myanmar, what is happening. The others, the minorities, were projected in such a way that today even someone is killing one minority in front of you, that citizen's eye, no one cares. So they are projected in such a way. So this framing, this stereotype is very dangerous. And as I said, more importantly, by passing certain discriminatory law, we are legalizing the discrimination against the minorities. Uh, and and importantly, there is a fact that there are the migrant minorities, the refugee minorities, but certain laws are framed to target those outsiders, quote and unquote, the arrived other. But while targeting them, the local minorities are also clubbed with the arrived minorities, and they are also under the fear of being persecuted, being expelled along with the arrived others. These are the some common uh, the points that I wanted to raise here, and take an example of Pakistan. Pakistan also has given refuge to uh, mm, 1.4 registered Afghan refugees. And India has also given refuge to some of the refugees, and as clearly pointed out in Citizenship Amendment Act, those from six, minority communities, including Hindus, Buddhists, and Christians, and Jains, and so on, so Sikhs, and so on, so. So what is it? Why certain communities are excluded? Why Hindus and Sikhs and Buddhists in Pakistan, Afghanistan are not being given space as the Afghans are given space in Pakistan? So why India is not giving space to Muslim refugees? Why select refugees? Why Pakistan has similar policy? So we should also talk about these countries. So is it necessary to follow the practices that are being practiced in Pakistan or Afghanistan? So it's easy. It's easy to point out, but we as a country of democratic fabric, a democratic structure, we as a country which has a say, century old civilization of Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, and and it's not that India only has this Tehzeeb. It was Pakistan also. It was Bangladesh also. Then what goes wrong? The most peaceful nation on this planet is considered as a Bhutan. What happened in Bhutan? Why Hindus were persecuted there? The reason being the rise of religious nationalism in this country has led to the discrimination against the minorities, which has also created refugees. So this was the uh, result of systematic legal persecution, and because citizenship is also citizenship is looked at through the lens of religion, not as a on the basis of humanity or on the basis of natural processes of birth. And the recent the law, the Citizenship Act of India, also resembles, which is mostly the base on religion, is also uh, resemble the uh, Israel's law of return of 1950. That was also one of the earliest law on the base of religion and ethnicity. So so if you look at the South Asia and even the global context also, even take example of America and Europe, uh, we will discuss that also in some time, that there is also a religious nationalism, the cultural nationalism in the so-called developed countries. There is a right-wing leadership. There is a rise of right-wing leadership. The white nationalism, some people call it as. So so there is this right-wing leadership, emergence of right-wing leadership in the global and the subcontinental and even in national level, which is creating problems day by day to the minorities and the created minorities. Uh, then the challenges to citizenship in South Asia are also result of history, result of porous borders, results of colonialism. It is also the result of poor documentation, non-seriousness on the part of people as well as uh, political parties and ruling governments. Therefore, I would like to conclude that there should be a legal framework to address the minorities in general and the refugee and immigrant minorities in particular. And there is no such a law in the subcontinent. And the law which has come, it would have been very nice to see that India has come up with such a wonderful idea of protecting refugees. But then in this wonderful idea, there was the black hole. And what was that black hole? That leaving one particular community on the air, to persecute it, to be killed, to be butchered like animals. This was the black hole in this particular good idea of citizenship amendment to address the refugees, but then we need more holistic approach to uh, address the refugee questions or the migrant questions or the minority questions in the Indian subcontinent, and not only legal framework, but its implication and legal framework which protects the basic fundamental rights, the human rights of these others, the minorities, the constructed minorities, and these uh, refugee and immigrant minorities. So we need, that this legal protection, and there is also a need of sensitizing people about the refugees and migrants. Many people misunderstood in South Asia refugees as migrants and more horribly as illegal migrants. Illegal migrants, quote and unquote. I would also disown this very idea of illegal migrants. There is nothing called illegal migrants. There is only two categories: documented migration and undocumented migration. This legal and illegal migration has a political flavor. So these refugees are also considered as illegal migrants. But remember, illegal migrants are quote and unquote, and the undocumented migrants are different from refugees. So we need few programs or sensitizing programs for this to chisel this misunderstanding from the masses in South Asia, and refugees are also considered as a burden to the society. There is this part, but most of the time refugees, when I had gone through the various interviews with refugees, then I come across that they never want to depend on the charity that you give. No, they want to work for themselves. They want to do the manual labor or whatever labor that they want. They have whatever skills that they have, they want to utilize those skills and earn their livelihood. They are never burden on our pockets. Huh. We as a nation, as India as a nation, has given certain rights to certain communities, refugee communities. Even Pakistan has given certain, civil and educational and uh, certain political rights to refugees in Pakistan, to certain refugee communities. And India, we have given the rights to, especially the government mandated refugees like Tibetans and Sri Lankans. They are into educations and business and trade and many things. So that's a different fact, but they are not at all the burdens, remember. And you will come to know if you go into that deeper debate. And they are also nowadays very fashionably called as a threat to nation or national security. This is also a misunderstanding. Of course, there must be some cases, some FIR might have registered. I have not come across though, but might have registered against refugees who are indulged into extremist activities. Not so far in India, but maybe in Bangladesh or Myanmar and so on. So, but that's a different case. But the case of Myanmar is a different case. So, and we also need to have a collective, uh, organization for the upliftment or the betterment of these most persecuted or most deprived, vulnerable community in the world. And the SARC, although SARC, I just said SARC because just to use collectively, because SARC is not functioning at all today. It's a very inactive organization. But just to speak, politically, SARC can also have organization like OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which established in 1960s with the 36 member countries from North and South America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. They have organized, they have this organization which helps to properly manage and systematically address the refugee question despite emerging right-wing political uh, stand in the West in these countries. So they try to help them, to the refugees through the getting the uh, uh, skilled and getting some jobs and education, access to health facilities, and so on. So things. So with this, I would conclude that the rise of extreme right-wing politics represented in the nationalism and ethnocentrism and othering is symptom of our times globally. In the Indian subcontinent, the empowerment of the right-wing political parties into positions of power in government and lawmaking is creating a situation of violence and discrimination against the minorities, especially the religious minorities. What also gave vigor to such inflammatory situation is the lack of legal framework and protection for the rights of refugees, migrants, and native minorities, and non-implementation of existing laws. Minorities who are already disempowered and deprived of education as well as economic and political accesses are facing atrocities and stripped of legal rights, even including citizenship. The devastating and dangerous dangers of politics of discrimination against minorities in the subcontinent is ignored as anti-minority policies and the laws are pursued by the right-wing governments to obtain their ideal homogeneous nations and political ambitions. The resurgence of religious nationalism through right-wing majoritarian ideologies into power and reformulation of discriminatory laws in the subcontinent has cast the darkest shadow on the democratic and developmental future in the subcontinent. It has also raised the question to our liberal democracies, liberal democratic values, principles of intellectual and moral progress. With this, I stop here. Thank you so much, Ayers and Ariba, for giving me this opportunity to present my ideas, my thinking on this contemporary issue. If you have or any participant has any suggestion, comment, question, or any you want to suggest me something, please do let me know. Uh, Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. The pleasure is ours. Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, your voice is breaking, Ariba.
Yeah, there is a network issue at my place today.
Yeah,
I don't know why.
yeah, all
So I
right.
was saying thank you so much for that illuminating lecture. We have learned so much from you today, sir. It was a great opportunity to learn from you. You know, as the one of the most prominent researchers from Young India. And people have been slowly, joining in late because I think word of mouth and that the lecture is going on well seems to have worked because a lot of people joined us slowly. So but unfortunately, there are hardly any questions. I request the participants to please
I am not able to see the.
questions. Yeah,
I'm not able to see
chat
the.
box, or you can also take the opportunity to directly ask it
Yeah,
after switching on their audio.
yeah, please.
We just received a question from Manzar Imam. He is asking that India largely adopted the British laws. While Britain dealt with the issue, what has gone wrong with India and planned to fail?
India largely adopted British law, while Britain dealt with the issue. What has gone wrong with India? Yes. See, thank you, Manzar, for asking this question. Actually, what happened? India, of course, has many adaptations from colonial, governmental structuralities, but then we have modified those governmentalities, those structures, as in the case of recently, in the case of citizenship amendment law, we modified India and Pakistan or any other countries in South Asia, we modified those structures according to the whims and interest of our ruling parties, be it anyone, be it Congress, be it BJP, be it the Pakistan's parties or the Mabatha in Mabatha-led party is in Myanmar, or the Nationalist Party in Sri Lanka. So we modify those, structures according to our ongoing interests. I hope I answered to your question, Manzar.
Thank you, sir, for that. If there are any more questions, I request the participants to ask the questions by unmuting
How
themselves.
does
Thank
refugee
you.
spending? There was one question from Tapu. How does refugees spending compare to sending? On, Tapu, are you there? You can ask directly.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Very good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Sir, how does the refugee spending compare to the spending on Bentarians and homelands? Sir, what is the uh, convey the refugees just
No problem. No problem. I hope you are trying to ask me the question like, how does refugees sending compare to sending on veteran and homeless? You mean, are you trying to ask me how refugees are different from homeless? Is this how I understood your question, or you want to re-put it, Tapu?
Mr. Tapu, would you respond, please?
He's actually our student here. I'm happy that he joined,
Okay.
and uh, I think he's trying to ask uh, how does refugees sending compare to sending to veteran and the homeless. If I'm not wrong, if I understood his question like this, he's trying to uh, find the difference between homeless and refugees. Homelessness is different, and it varies from people to people. Refugees are different, although they are homeless, but homelessness can be also at your home itself, your homeland itself. So homelessness can be beggar on the street, and refugees have the again this crossing of border. I would also add one more category here: internally displaced. They are also homeless, and refugees are uh, refugee who cross the national border. I hope I tried to reach to you and your query. Any other question?
Thank you. Yes, so there's one question by Rakesh Kumar. He
Yeah.
says that he wants actually your comments or your views on how peaceful return of Rohingya refugees from Bangladesh to the native places. He just wants you to share your views on this question.
Yeah, Rakesh, thank you for asking this question. And refugees are an important part. Yeah, this question has again, given the space for the point that I miss. Refugees are born to return when the situations are normal. And but then, how normal those situations? What are the parameters of that normality? Those vary. And is there a possibility of normalcy without the intervention of, uh, you know, the legality or the international bodies? Simply waiting leads to normalcy. So those are different things. But the very idea how peaceful it is, this is very important. For example, you ask in the context of Rohingya, there are still sparks of violence in Myanmar. So it's quite difficult for pushing someone again back into the fire, which is not silenced yet. So it's difficult as of now, maybe gradually, and if the government change or policies change there, and if international bodies work for the peaceful return of these people, things will normalize gradually, but not as of now. As we, as a India, we have sent many refugees back to Sri Lanka because things were normalized there. But then you have different questions of these returnees, those who went back to India, to Jaffna in Sri Lanka. They had many complaints. Although we understood that there is a peace in Sri Lanka now, and these people can be sent back to Sri Lanka, and some of them return to Sri Lanka. But then when they reach there, their houses were being, taken by their neighbors, their properties being even captured by even militaries. The government has also captured their properties. So these questions are there. So this is a very serious question. This is very, thought-provoking and genuine question. Thank you for asking this.
Sir, good morning. Good morning, sir.
Good
May
morning.
I ask a question?
Please, please.
Actually, sir, sorry to divert a little bit, but I would like you to talk about voluntary movement. You were talking about forced movement,
Yeah.
but in the case of voluntary movement, there is a reversal of otherness. I have in mind what happens in Tamil Nadu, for example. People are settled in Tamil Nadu from northern part of the country. They are from a dominant linguistic background. They want to impose upon their language on the language of the aborigines, Tamilians, for example. So I would like you to focus on that.
Yeah. See, this voluntary migration, I hope this is what I understand. You mean this, and you want me to give my views on this. Voluntary migration, be it in the case of migration or refugee, is again uh, is a choice migration, but then has some sort of no choice. But then when you talk about this specific context of northerners moving to south and trying to, you know, uh, linguistically dominate these public spaces or social spaces or spaces in Tamil Nadu. So that's a part of linguistic, dominance, which is being taking place today in India. But that migration, that kind of migration is again leading to the tension between the migrants and host countries, host societies. I don't say country because we are talking in the context of India. So in this case, this leads to the anxious relations, or this leads to the not peaceful relation between the migrants and host. Therefore, you see that even in India, we have the sparks of, migrant crisis. Although those were not being, those sparks have not become the major issues in our media and social political debates, but there are sparks. There are sparks of this kind of what you are talking in terms of language. But come back to Gujarat, you had the issues of migrants in Gujarat. You have issues of migrants in Mumbai, Maharashtra. So there are these kind of problems in India also. But then it varies whether they are linguistically dominating, whether they are politically dominating, whether they are economically dominating. Did I answer to you, Solomon?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, thank you. Is Rohingya refugee have the right to vote in our country? Kumari, no, Kumari and thank you for asking this question, but no, there is no right, because uh, they are still in the process of, not being recognized. In other words, these people is a vote bank in our country. Not now. As of now, there are no because they have not received any right as of now. But yes, refugees as a vote bank is important in the context of South Asia, especially in the case of India. Certain refugees are not given right, but certain refugees are given right. So those refugees will obviously become the vote bank for the party which is given them right to have the vote, right to get citizenship. So there is this angle of vote bank and refugee. So thank you for asking this question, Kumari.
Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question? I request the participants to please.
Yeah, thank you.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, please. Who's this? Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, Tapu, sir.
Tapu, tell me. Yeah.
Sir, resident population is citizen. Enforcement, how can migrate smuggling by significantly reduce the border management enhanced without understanding the humanities uh, obligations.
Can you repeat it again, Tapu?
So enforcement, how can enforcement, how can migrate smuggling be significantly reduced and border management enhanced without undermining humanities and obligations?
Do you mean how my
The resident population is citizens.
ha, actually, see, if I am not wrong, you are trying to ask me the question that how resident migrants and migrants smuggling, you mean, right,
Yes, sir.
are working together despite the border management.
Border management, sir.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. See, border management. Let us take an example of India and Bangladesh border. Our border is not that much strong, so therefore we have exchange of goods and people from there legally and illegally, and even with the help of authorities at the border. So we have to look at, but then what works there? Money sometimes. What works there? Different factors work there. The trafficking works, the smuggling works, as you mentioned. So these things are there. So these things are loopholes of our systems. And now it's our responsibility, in a sense, we as a government, we as a nation state, how we as a uh, managing body, tackle with these things. Those things would be there, but the only thing how properly we channelize, how properly we control those things. Thank you, Tapu.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Hello.
Yeah, Swami Patel.
Sir, I just want to ask why refugees are coming to India. Suppose they are coming from Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, maybe Pakistan. But why are they not going to China?
Thank you, sir. Wonderful question. Actually, what happened usually, uh, refugees in South Asia, they migrate usually to neighboring countries. They migrate because, for example, refugees coming from Sri Lanka and Myanmar and Pakistan, they come to India because India is a neighboring country. But despite this border restrictions and these new laws, but then why they are not going to China? This is because of two things. One, because They found India as a comparatively safer place, despite all these restrictions and all that. And distance also matters. Sometimes refugees who come to India, when they did not find, homely atmosphere, when they find hostilities, they move to Bangladesh. Many Rohingyas moved to Bangladesh. And Tibetans, some moved to Tibet and from India, and some also moved to Nepal. And it is not that refugees from South Asia only migrating to India. No, they are migrating to India, they are migrating to Bangladesh, they are migrating to almost all parts of the world wherever they could find hope. Wherever they don't find hope, they just bounce from there. They move, they route and they en route to another route. So there are routes of migrants and refugees. And uh, China, we have no much examples. I have not done much study on why refugees are there or not there in China. But this is what my answer is. I hope there must be possibility of refugees in China. I have not given much thought to it. But what I mean to say is that they are not only coming to India, but they are going to every place in the world wherever they find some hope. I hope I answered to your question, sir.
Yes, sir. I just want to add something here.
Please, sir.
According to you, if they find some hope and they migrate there, that means those countries are liberal for them for some extent, and they are not aggressive, so that they migrate there. That means that since Germany is the most liberal country in the world.
Uh, Germany, no, if you talk about in terms of number, then it's not Germany, it's Turkey. It's Turkey followed by Iran, I guess, and then Pakistan in terms of number. These are the countries which host world's most of the refugees. So we can't talk in terms of number. Huh. What I said, wherever they find hope in a sense, wherever, and if they find the hostility, they move. So now it can be applicable to any country. Yes, Germany, there are many refugees in Germany, asylum seekers from MENA, Middle East and North Africa. But that's different context. But then those who come to Germany, they did not directly come to Germany. They come to another southern part of Europe, then move to Germany. So there are ways of migration within this migration process. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Any other question or?
Yeah, is there any other question? Actually, I was disconnected, so I lost the chat. There are two questions in chat, sir.
One is from Suthara, Mrs. Sutharsan. What are the difficulties faced by refugees, and what are the difficulties in education? Acha. Sutharshan is trying to ask the question in terms of refugees and their education. Thank you for asking this question. The education is one of the basic things, and for which the many governments do permit the refugees to get admitted into schools. And there are many NGOs in India, despite the government restrictions, they voluntarily go and teach the refugee children of these refugees communities in India. So of course there are challenges to their education unless and until government has given permission, like in government of India has given permission to government mandate refugees in India to access to job and access to education and some civil rights. So for example, Sri Lankans and Chakmas and and what else? Tibetans. We had many Tibetans and Chakma students at our university. So what I mean to say is also depends on government as well as the voluntary NGOs. I hope I answer to you, Sutarsan. Uh, Now we have one more question. What is the vetting process for refugees coming to India and any other country? Pargati, am I right? Hello?
Yes, sir. This is the
Yes,
question.
sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for asking this question. What is the vetting process? What is means? Yeah, see what happened earlier when today we talk about when in the context of Rohingya, we said that Rohingyas are threat to security because they are result of some and some of them are involved into extremist activities. But then we had the proper procedure of accommodating these so-called refugees which are from this tension prone zones we had a proper scrutinization of those refugees as we did in the case of Sri Lankan refugees. They were also from the some of them were also accused of involved into extremist activities. So but then we had proper psychological testing and uh, surveillance and so on so things. So we had different procedures for allowing refugees to come into India, and one because and talking in terms of formality, uh, many that's one through point of view of security. Another point of view of what do you say documentation is that government gives certain certificates to these refugees as well as UNHCR India, the chapter of UNHCR India also give certain cards to these refugees. So the moment they come to India, they need to apply to those UNHCR bodies and they get certificate from them. These are the some processes of uh, refugees or getting refugee status in India. I hope I answered to your Pragati.
I think so, sir. Thank you so much for taking time out from your busy schedule for this, sir. Not only the lecture, but also the question answer round was very interesting because of the varied questions and the responses that were given. I would now like to request Asta Binzani to please deliver the vote of thanks and post the feedback link in the chat. Over to you, Asta. Asta, are you able to hear me?
Schedule. Yeah. Ariba, can you hear me?
Yes, now you're audible. Please continue.
Yeah. I would like to thank Dr. Sajauddin for an insightful lecture. Thank you so much, sir. I would like to thank all the participants for joining us today. I would also like to extend my thanks to the President of AIRS, Ariba Muazzam, for her tireless efforts which have made this event possible. I would like to thank Ajab Rangunwala, Farisuddin Muazzam, Zeba Muazzam, Mohammad Shebu Shaibu, Manas with making this lecture a success. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Asta. Thank you, Asta, for succinctly giving us the vote of thanks. Before we close the event, I would request Sajauddin sir if he has any points of experience of being on a forum, he could share them now.
Thank you so much, Ariba, for organizing this. And first of all, I must congratulate you for coming up with this initiative. And we were in conversation through email, and I had this opportunity to meet you virtually. And I'm sure, and I have been following the airs. You have speakers from different parts of the world, and this organization is taking up wonderful, interesting, and contemporary topics in our social and humanity discourses. I wish you all the best for your future events. And if you require any of my help, you can always, drop me a mail. And I hope, please do share me the feedback. I would also like to see the opinion of participants and if possible, the questions. This would help us to, improve our scholarship. And therefore we always, I love the questions. I love the criticism because that build us, that chisel us to, we're not perfect, but towards perfection. With this, I would like to thank you once again for inviting me to this talk, and wish you all the best for your future endeavors.
Thank you so much for your kind words. So they are very encouraging, and I'll surely share the feedback and the comments that you will receive in the with the feedback form. And thank you for all the encouraging words. And I know that you are just a mail away, and we hope that you join us in our organization as well. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of you once again for joining us today. Have a great day ahead. And I hope to see all of you at our next lecture by Dr. Preeti Raghunathan, Assistant Professor at Symbiosis, Pune, on the topic Politics of Global Media Policies on January 24th at 11 a.m. So please take care, stay safe, and have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Thank you all of you for joining.